All right, thanks everybody for coming. I think we have a quorum, so let's go ahead and get started. Could you call the roll, please, Mark?
Certainly. Mr. Ankuma is here.
Aye.
Mr. Castillo is not here. Ms. Gill
Here.
is here. Mr. Lawrence.
Here.
Okay, great. Mr. Reitinger.
Here.
Ms. Ward, not here yet. And Mr. Webb, we're going to get him in a little bit. Great. We do have a quorum, 4 present.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is it this PC?
Thank you. That takes us to item 1.04, adoption of the agenda. Unless there are any comments, I'll ask for unanimous consent to
Yes.
adopt the agenda. Seeing no objection, we will proceed. Thank you. The next item up is approval for remote participation. As I think everyone knows, Mr. Webb could not be here this evening, but he will be. Is he present on the phone already?
No, he's not.
Could we dial him in, please? So I will accept a motion to allow his remote participation.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Webb's participation is approved. So we are going to, I think, go into, the first item on our agenda is a closed meeting. So can I hear a motion, please, on the closed meeting? Hi, Lawrence, we're just starting.
Hi, Lawrence, we're just starting.
Trying to load my,
You got it? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter. Legal matters under Section 2.2-3711A7, in particular, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation or briefing would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, and personnel under Section 2.2-3711A1, in particular, non-renewal of a specific employee.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Very good.
Mr. Kimball?
Yes. Mr. Ankuma.
Aye.
Ms. Gill.
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Castillo. This is about to go into closed session. Okay. Very good. Mr. Reitinger.
Yes.
Ms. Ward.
Yes.
And Mr. Webb.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Can I hear a motion to reconvene?
In open session, so moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. So would someone like to certify the closed meeting? Go for it.
Whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-377B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Falls Church City Public School Board hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies, and 2, only such public business matters as are identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Second.
Mr. Ankuma.
Aye.
Mr. Castillo. Ms. Gill.
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Reitinger.
Yes.
Ms. Ward.
Yes.
Mr. Webb. No. Oh. Hello. Is he there?
He wasn't in the
Webb?
closed session, so
Okay, he wasn't in the closed.
he doesn't.
Can we read? Okay, that's right.
Lawrence, are you there?
I abstain as I was not in the closed.
Okay.
Thank you. So that takes us to Section 4, Public Comments and Requests. In accordance with School Board Bylaws 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written comments may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to board members and for the record. So we have so far 6 requests for public comment. If anybody has additional ones, please pass them on up. The first request is for Julie
Right then.
Raven. I wasn't sure if it was Braun. Ms. Braven, please go.
Okay, I just wanted to talk tonight about the athletic facilities for our new school. It's been said around that we've wanted 3 gyms in our new high school, and we actually don't believe that we need to be extravagant in that. We just want to ask that we could have our competition gym and our athletic facilities become equal to what our small school competitors have. Right now, we're below that, and we're actually one of the bigger sizes in the school district. Tonight, I just want to talk mainly about the competition gym since I only have 3 minutes, but I can talk really fast. So the first thing is that our competition gym right now is actually substandard. Tonight, our region counterpart, another small school, came and was asking us why we have an 84-foot court when the VHSL standard is 94 feet. That's what most of the schools in the state of Virginia have. And I believe that goes back to a problem when we built it with Fairfax County, but it is below standard. The next issue is actually a safety issue. She asked why our doors lead right onto the court. So as anybody enters, you could be hit by a ball, hit by a player. It's dangerous for the players. It's dangerous for the spectators. It's dangerous for the referees, but some people might not care about that. Another issue is the locker room, and I don't know if you've heard about, but the middle school only has 2, but your typical high school has 4 locker rooms. And since we only have 2, our boys and girls share a locker room, and I think for privacy and other issues, you should not be mixing genders. Because the girls go into the male locker room, we have male teachers that have gone into the male locker room to shower, and then our girls have gone in after school, and they were both in there at the same time. And I think that's something that you never, ever want to happen. When we have double headers, we put the boys in a classroom. The away team, we put the girls in the locker room, and they share a bathroom that does have a solid divider, but it's only solid enough you can still hear as if you were just on separate stalls. And again, I think that's just a privacy issue that is kind of asking for trouble. And it's something that no other high school in our district has. They have 4 locker rooms. Another issue is while we are ADA accessible, I do think that we are ADA unfriendly. I don't know if that's an official term. But when you have someone that maybe needs to use the restroom who's in a wheelchair or on crutches, they must get security, go the width of the building to get to the elevator, go upstairs, return the width of the building to go to the restroom, and then return all of that with the person waiting to help them into the elevator. And you probably miss, a large portion of the game that you've just paid to enter. And we don't necessarily think that that's fair. So what we are asking for is a competition gym in our high school. And while that does benefit us for all of those reasons, it would also benefit our PE department, who, as we get bigger and we're projecting a 1,200 to 1,500 student body, they're not going to fit in the 2 gyms that we have now. You could turn this large competition gym into 2 classrooms. You could turn the auxiliary gym into a classroom, depending on the size, could be 2. We're asking for a rate room that fits a class, which our current one does not fit it accurately or adequately. And if we had a wrestling room, that would be another location for our PE, because we do offer champ training. And we have with a bigger student body, you would have more classes, but we could also offer advanced PE, possibly to juniors or seniors, since we are trying to excel in mind, body, and spirit. Whew. I really had a lot more to say. Is that alarm for me? Okay. Those are my 3 minutes. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Got to figure out how to work this thing better. Great, thank you very much. And I forgot to mention it before Ms. Braven spoke, but if people would state their name and address for the record, that'd be great. Thank you. The second request is Mr. Tom Johnson.
Thank you. My name is Tom Johnson, president of the Athletic Boosters Association at George Mason High School. The address is 152 Rees Place, right here in Falls Church. I spoke at the last meeting and don't want to repeat that. But since then, I think all of you have received an open letter from the Athletic Boosters Association, which sums up the situation, and Coach Braven just supplemented that. What I wanted to do was address some comments in the media and various emails that are flying around, which kind of set up an academics versus athletics construct, which is really fallacious in the case of this community. It's really a package deal, starting with the motto of the high school, which is mind, body, and character. It all goes together, and part of that package deal is what comes out of the athletic program, which is ability to engage in teamwork, physical fitness, someone who's coachable, teachable, self-discipline, time management, good behavior, etc. It's why colleges want athletes not necessarily to play for them. They recruit them, and it's a small minority, but they want athletes generally. And in that regard, for those of you who haven't been through the college admission process recently, or who haven't started it yet, You can talk to any selective school in the country, and they'll tell you that over 90% of their applicants are fully qualified and would do just fine. But their admission rate, as you know, may be something like 5%, 10, 15, 20, on up. And even if it's 40%, that's still something where an applicant has to differentiate himself or herself from the others, and sports is something that can do it. And the kids at Mason have a unique opportunity that probably doesn't exist at any other public high school anywhere that I know of, which is, the point is that more than 50% of our students at Mason participate in interscholastic sports. And so they get the experience and the qualities that I just mentioned, but also in terms of college admission and later on, it really, really helps. The precise figures were 485 last school year. That's well over half the enrollment. Take out the eighth graders, it was 423, so it's still over 50% of the enrollment. And just in the spring, last spring, 370 kids run Mason teams. Take out the eighth graders, 323. So that's an extraordinary figure, and that opportunity doesn't exist probably anywhere else. Small schools like ours don't have as many sports. The big schools, of course, have too many students. And in closing on that point, I'll just mention that one of the most beloved and respected teachers in our system left a neighboring district, and one of the reasons he gives is that his last year there, they cut 100 girls from the soccer program. Now they have 3 teams, freshman, JV, and varsity, but that's still an awful lot of kids from one program, and he just didn't want to be part of that. And we would hope that no opportunities here are diminished in terms of the ability, the opportunity to participate in sports. And kids don't get that opportunity in most other school districts. If I can just make one more point, just give one example on the importance of the program. No? Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Johnson. Just- we start doing exceptions, then everybody gets it. But if you could submit your letter for the record, we'll be glad to circulate it to everybody. Thank you. The next person is Ms. Marcus. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Maria Marcus. My address is 307 Kent Street, Falls Church City. And I was here 2 weeks ago to speak to you all, and I hope start a bit of a conversation of sorts between the Band Boosters and the school board about our fantastic band program across all 3 of our schools. I'm here tonight actually to specifically ask that you reinstate a budget for our bands. And 7 years ago, we did have a budget for our bands. Currently, our bands are budgeted through materials funding and I think sometimes emergency funding. In the past year and a half, that means that they've actually seen no funds. In November of 2015, our former superintendent notified the teachers that whatever was left in their materials funds was no longer available to them. And as you know, this year in our budget, there are no materials funds designated, which leaves the band program effectively without any kind of funding and without any kind of line item in our budget. So as I said last time I was here, we have over 600 students in our band programs across all 3 schools. These are our student musicians, but they're also our student athletes. They are our Odyssey of the Mind kids. They are our literary magazine children who are contributing at all 3 schools. They are our special needs children, and they are our English as a second language children. Band is one of those wonderful, all-encompassing kind of activities, and it's a part of our curriculum. Their parents are dedicated. They are dedicated financially by renting equipment. They're dedicated by reminding them to practice, financing lessons, getting them to and from rehearsals. And 2 years ago, in 2014, we had a parent who donated the equivalent of $14,000 for a new floor in our high school band room. That was done with the express agreement of the facilities management that the school would then finance acoustic tiles for that room. That didn't happen. What we see here is an amazing commitment by students, parents, community. What I'm asking from you is an amazing commitment from you. In exactly 30 days, our high schoolers will be on the stage of Carnegie Hall performing. I think we owe it to them and to the grades who are below them, who are looking up to them, to maintain this program, because as it currently stands, it will not be able to continue any longer. We have a teacher at MEH right now who has 341 students that he teaches across 2 days. Next year, there will be, with the expected influx and the 8th grade orchestra, there will be 380 students at MEH playing in either orchestra or band. As far as I know, that actually is above the caps of students for our band director. I mention that because outside of a budget issue, that's on the horizon as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Nessen.
Definitely. Hi, I'm Kate Nessen, 302 North Virginia Avenue, Falls Church. Okay. Athletics isn't just an extra at George Mason, but an integral part of how we have created such a successful community of students. Mason is known for its emphasis on mind, body, and character, which produces graduates who excel because they're able to take on the multiple challenges they face post-graduation in college and/or work, because so many of them have done this as student athletes, juggling a demanding academic schedule along with demanding athletic practice and game schedules. Balance, by the way, is the current big buzzword with college admissions, and Mason is producing exactly what colleges are looking for: students who can juggle multiple demands and yet find a way to have balance in their lives. The reality is our facilities are maxed out right now. The Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School gym was built 10 years ago, and the design was dictated by what Fairfax County would allow. Using the Mary Ellen Henderson gym was supposed to be a short-term fix until the new Mason campus would be built. Here we are 10 years later with no new Mason campus. Although this new school should have been built yesterday, we still need to take our time and explore every option to find out what is feasible at this location, instead of letting a date in November dictate what our new school will look like. We're asking you to look at the big picture and realize that the impact reducing the athletic space at Mason will have on the entire community. Sure, Mason athletics will continue to be majorly inconvenienced if we don't have a competition gym and an aux gym and a wrestling room and a new weight room. But with our athletic facilities currently being used 100% of the time, reducing the space will have a major adverse impact on Falls Church City Parks and Rec's ability to offer rec league basketball. Details of Parks and Rec's use of Mason's athletic facilities were provided in a letter the athletic boosters submitted to the school board and Dr. Schiller and the City Council earlier this week. To summarize, the athletic boosters are asking only for what Mason really needs. We are not asking for the Taj Mahal. Quite simply, we would like to be on par with the other schools we compete with in the Bull Run District. We ask you to not be short-sighted, but to look at the big picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Next comment is Ms. Brown.
Hi, I'm Allison Brown, 706 Poplar Drive. I have 2 children in the Falls Church City Schools. One's at MEH and one's at TJ. As you're considering your final budget proposal for the upcoming year, I urge you to consider 2 priorities. One is increasing ESOL services, and the other is maintaining small class sizes. In terms of the ESOL program, we really need a new ESOL coordinator for the whole Falls Church City school system. We also need to make sure that you fund what I think is currently in the proposal, but a 0.5 FTE ESOL teacher at TJ. In terms of the ESOL coordinator, that position is critical in terms of evaluating and placing dual language students, in terms of regular assessments of how those students are progressing and learning the language, maintaining outreach to those students and their families. And as we all know, language development affects all areas of achievement, so we really can't shortchange this group of kids. Second, in terms of small class sizes that we have right now, they improve the learning environment for all students and for teachers as well, who can manage the classrooms more easily. In terms of trade-offs, because I know every budget involves trade-offs, things that I don't see as necessary are a new full-time human resources position, and also I'd ask you to reconsider whether the administrative raise needs to go through, and especially at the level that you're considering currently, that needs to be on the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Last up is Ms. Kutchma.
Hi, Allison Kutchma, 813 Fulton Avenue. First thing, I was wondering if the school district had a check writing policy. So because I noticed during the budget season, last year, the money's really tight down to the penny. And then, and we didn't have money, and this is a little bit of a repeat, but we didn't have money to fund substitute teachers at Mount Daniel last fall. And then Dr. Jones was able to write a check for cash to buy a van. And so where did that money come from? And is there any process by which that writing of that check would need board approval? And that was just a question. The other thing I wanted to just put in a plea for a special education audit, just to look at what the impact on special education students has been, because we've had a part-time special ed director for the last 2 years. Historically, our district has put a big emphasis on compliance. That's been the name of the game. It's about compliance. And when you do that, you have to forego quality of instruction. And, just to give you an example, in my student, it was compliance to have a paraprofessional in the classroom. And in the meetings, what was represented that the paraprofessional is going to be working with my student on all of these goals, and that means instruction and intersection of instruction. That's what implementation actually is. And in conversations with this paraprofessional, they admitted that they didn't even know enough about the subject matter. There was some basic vocabulary they didn't know, and they were just completely untrained. And it's an awkward position to put this paraprofessional in this position. So it's an indication, that the emphasis is on paper, there's actually a warm body for 100 minutes, but that doesn't mean that there's any quality there. And I'm concerned that there is just continuing this focus on, are we in compliance? Last year, or maybe it was the year before, I brought an issue to the school board because staff had told me they were concerned about a compliance issue at the high school. And then we found out that there wasn't a compliance issue. But the concern was about being right or wrong. There was no concern about the lack of process. So I just hope that we can have a special education audit that can look at all these issues to help some of the neediest students in our entire system. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kutchma. Any further public comment? Excellent. Thank you all very much. We appreciate that. So we will go on to the next item of business, which is personnel action 5.01. Thank you.
Chair, I would make a motion
Thank you.
that the school board approve the recommendation of the superintendent for the non-renewal of an employee.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Let's go to 5.02, the review of the proposed FY18 budget. Dr. Schiller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the board. As we had deferred from last week, is a final determination of the submission of our fiscal year operating budget, fiscal year food services budget, and fiscal year 18 community service budget. We have provided for you again the worksheet that we have been delving into over the past 2.5 months, almost 3 months now that we've been working on this process. I would like to once again thank the board for the countless hours that you have put into this very deliberative and very transparent process for the community to be able to see to what extent where every dollar is intended to go and how we were able to afford the very things that you have in your budget. What we ask for you tonight is to take in consideration of where we are with staying within 2.7% increase as the city guidance was, and to consider if indeed there is anything else that this board would like to include with regard to a request of the city. I will turn to Mr. Kimball to also talk a little bit about the fiscal year 18 food service budget and the community services budget, so then turn it back to you for your determination, sir.
Thank you.
Great. As you'll notice on the budget motions, because there seemed to be general agreement in terms of the staff, the fixed costs, the mandates, and then the salary improvements, both the food service fund and the food service fund receives no city transfer to support it. It is by all means essentially self-supporting. The community service fund does receive a small city transfer to pay for a subsidy for the sliding scale on the daycare program, and then also the BIE program. But essentially, the lion's share of the city transfer comes to Fund 60, the operating budget. Therefore, with the assumption that the board is still in agreement with these items, was able to calculate the amounts for the entire budget, and then the city transfers were appropriate to those other two funds. So really, what's at play right now is the biggest piece of the budget, which is the school operating budget, which is our pre-K 12 program.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball. So I apologize that I was not able to be here last week due to previously scheduled business travel, but I understand that substantial progress was made. Everyone has the documents from the school superintendent, including items to be within the guidance budget, and then a suggested set of items to include that are roughly $400,000 above guidance, which is about a penny on the tax rate, which would take us to about 3.7% increase of the city transfer as opposed to 2.7, which is guidance. So with that, I will just open up the floor for discussion about, let me ask a preliminary question first. Is there any argument about what's in the 2.7 guidance scenario? Any discussion about that? If not, then let's move on to the items that are to be included in the above guidance scenario.
Yes, so I would, my preference would be to move the ESOL, system-wide ESOL coordinator up into that category and remove the assistant human resources director. I think based on the ESOL audit and the needs of that population, especially in the current environment, I want to make sure that we are fully supporting that community as much as we can in our budget.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. Any other thoughts?
I was going to say there's a difference of about 11,000 between those two items, and I'd advocate that could start the band boosters if they could get their own budget or whatever it is that's allocated to them within the materials. But
yes, sir. I'll tell you, please understand that over the past 6 months, 5.5, 6 months, I have approved many purchase orders to J.W. Pepper, to Fox's Music. The band boosters are being, the bands and our music program is being provided with supplies that are being requested. I believe that the issue at hand may be the internal school budgets and how those might be divided up by departments, as opposed to viewing it as a larger pot of money that can shift between years depending on the needs. For example, one year, the band program may need to buy a tuba, and they're very, very expensive, and they're not going to buy a tuba every year. The next year, maybe those funds would go towards a science program. The following year, maybe something for the PE program. So it's not that the music program or any program has been told they have no money. I think it's more of an internal building issue in terms of, okay, here's our materials and supplies budget, and the English department you get this much, music department you get this much, science et cetera. And to the extent that materials and supplies are an issue, I would suggest, and we've talked about this in an earlier work session, that the $114,000 that we're proposing to the board to restore materials and supplies to prior year levels would make a positive impact in that area, not only to band but to the media centers, to the English programs, to the science programs, all across the board.
Is there a little bit more transparency? I'm thinking of a band program that's system-wide, or at least across multiple buildings, right? Is it feasible to think they could have a designated budget that straddles multiple buildings, or they have to be pigeonholed into each building?
Traditionally, I mean, each building has had its own budget, its own music programs. I do know that we have a fine arts cert. Do we not? That might be something to discuss. With that person or with the instructional certs, in general. But currently, it's there's a budget for the TJ program. I approve purchases that are specific to Mary Ellen Henderson, purchases that are specific to the high school.
And are these additional purchases that you approve over and above the supplies budget?
The purchases are actually within the supplies budget. Each building has a supply budget, and for regular ed, special ed, gifted, and the various departments and programs spend out of a common materials and supply line item. So, for example, at the high school, it would be about, I think that line item is about $70,000 for the year for all the departments.
Michael, I might suggest one thing. As a friendly response, I think certainly we've heard concerns about how supply budgets were allocated within buildings before, about maybe in some schools they've run out too quickly and not had anything to spend for the remainder of the year. And I think you're right to be concerned about, is music, for example, getting enough across all of the schools? But at the same time, there's value in letting the principals decide how to spend money within their buildings. I think one of the things we might ask Dr. Schiller to do is just take a look at how the schools are allocating and managing their supply budget, and at least share some best practices and recommend any policy changes that would add value. But I think the question for us this evening is probably more about are we putting the right amount in? And so, does that sound reasonable to you?
Sounds reasonable to me. I mean, my thing is, this year I'm a little concerned about those who don't seem to have a voice, and so I just want to make sure that they get heard. Yeah.
And we just, last week we were meeting with Mr. Hills, and we were having a conversation just about band. I've heard from, when I've met with the CERTs, about science and other departments, and what I've suggested that we do, and we'll do this with all principals, to sit down and when the principals gather, what are the needs for next year? Once they have those needs, they can see who has needs and where, and then allocate components of money for those different departments, but always keeping a little bit of funds that are general in case if there are emergencies. And it's what we used to do a few years ago, where we had justifications for the budgeting and how that big pot of money would be split up and spent. We've not done that in the last couple of years. And so that's something that I've encourage some of the principals to go back to doing that, so that the year starts out with knowing this is the amount of money this department has, but the general account is still, there's still funds there for emergency situations that come up, because they will.
And I'll be perfectly honest with you too. That was not ideal either. There were certain departments where large purchases would be coming in towards the end of the year, where obviously by the time the materials got in, basically it was a week. It would be a week before the students were leaving. So essentially, by designated by department, you've designated funds that then, for whatever reasons, may or may not be spent, or while there may be competing needs within the same building that need to be addressed. So it's I think as Mr. Reitinger said, I think it's a fine balance But between knowing what you have and then also realizing that the needs can shift and change among and between the years.
I'll go with that. Thank you.
Mr. Castillo?
I'm good for now.
John?
A couple things. First, I've got 3 items I'd like to move up from tier 1 to the other one, but my question is about Mount Daniel. We've got Mount Daniel on the agenda later. I'm not sure, since we've got another closed meeting, I'm not sure what we can talk about. My concern is, we've received an email about, the Mount Daniel project that I think...
Perhaps, John, not to interrupt, but we could ask Dr. Schiller, could you say something right now about the background?
Regarding the bids?
Yeah.
Yes. Because of the fact that we are in a situation with further negotiations with contractors, and there's a certain limitation of what I can share with you in public as opposed to what we would be able to have to talk about in an executive session. We did receive bids as we've been waiting, and over the weekend I was notified that how the bids came in. And as I had reported to you, the bids are higher than expected. And there is a process that we'd be going through that I would then brief you about that would be covered by the laws of the closed session under real estate, and also to be able to speak to any questions that you would have relative to that process we're going. And then the board could also then determine to come back later into open session to discuss certain planning options. So if that is what you're referring to, Mr. Lawrence, yes, we'll be prepared to go over what is required either in public and what is appropriate in closed session later tonight. This matter just came onto our agenda, as you know, because of what came forward over the weekend. And I have Mr. Jones here from Arcadis, and we've been working over the weekend and also today in preparing to give you a complete update and to advise as to what next steps have to be taken.
Okay. Well, no, my only point is, to me, this goes along with our operating budget simply because it's a project that would be starting in less than 6 months. So if it's got implications for the city in terms of finding money for, bids that came in higher because we got delayed by Fairfax, so we had to go out and rebid, whether it's in the CIP or they have to find it somewhere else. For me, at least, it will help inform what I would want to ask the city for in our operating budget, because I'm perfectly happy to go over guidance. I mean, we pretty much agreed to a penny, but I think we need to know that if we're asking for over guidance and we need to go back and ask for something else in the CIP or funded some other way, we need to know, because that's going to be not well received by our city council colleagues. And I just want us to go in with our eyes open. So what I would like to do is restore the para subs, which I think was $3,200, $3,400, something like that, at Mount Daniel. And I would like to put the kindergarten teacher and the para also up into the funded category, because I think next year at Mount Daniel is going to be awful with the construction, with Trailer Village, and I would like to go out of our way to help make things as good as possible. And also, frankly, we can never predict kindergarten, and we rarely get surprised on the downside. It's always up. So, but my main point here is, and frankly, I would almost ask that we consider voting on the budget next week, is we need to figure out how this new Mount Daniel information works into our request, because yes, one is operating, one might be capital, but for a capital project that starts in 6 months, it's not theoretical. It's not like something in the CIP that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. The Planning Commission, we called that funny money, because you didn't have to fund it. You could put anything you wanted in because you didn't have to fund it the next year. Mount Daniel's happening in 6 months, and we need to be sensitive to that when we ask our city colleagues for our operating budget.
So, Mr. Horns, I have a suggestion on that, which is, I think we're going to hear more about this in discussions in both closed and open session later tonight. Because we don't yet have, as we've often had in the past, the final line item budgets to formally approve, it would make sense to me if the board was willing to do this, to approve essentially what we think in substance the proposals ought to be, to have Mr. Kimball then prepare the final line item budgets, and we could formally sign off on it at our meeting next week, which, unless something changes with regard to Mount Daniel, would be a pro forma action. We would have a substantive agreement today, but we would actually delay the formal approval till next week to make sure that nothing was changing. Does that make sense?
That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, as long as, we realize that it may change, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ward, absolutely.
So I have a question, and this is mainly, I guess, directed to you, Hunter. On the tier 3, there's assistant athletic director.
Yes.
Is that, well, the way it used to be, Tom Horn was the athletic director and Coach Braven was the assistant, and she moved up into Tom's position, yes? Is that what happened?
Yes.
So what happened to her position? Is that what this is right here?
Yeah. Currently, that's being funded as an EPD for each season, and so we have someone who is a teacher who's serving that role right now. So once Ms. Braven went up, we had someone to fill the assistant athletic director
So it was
position.
an EPD position for her as well?
It was a teaching position, and it was a combination between the attorney and athletic director, but she was doing a lot of the athletics because the legal services took up a lot of time for Mr. Horn. Yeah. But there have always been those EPDs, and she was receiving those EPDs as well.
So this is beyond EPD. This would be a full-time assistant athletic director? Okay. All right. Thank you.
And therefore, those EPDs would more than likely go away if we were to put the position in.
And right now, are those EPDs funded? They are?
They are,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Sorry, Mr. Webb. There are too many Lawrences.
You can never have too many Lawrences.
But right now, generally I'm good. And the items that we're talking about bringing up, I'm okay with as well. In particular, the ESOL coordinator, and then I'm also what Mr. Lawrence was talking about with the closed session that's coming up. I think your compromise is trying to how to handle the situation depending upon what we may need to do with the Mount Daniel project. If we preliminarily move forward tonight with the understanding and then moving them with a final approval for next week, I think should handle that particular situation.
So, thank you, Mr. Webb. To go back to Mr. Castillo.
I have a couple of questions, and first I'll have an observation. And the first is the 2.7% organic revenue growth figure that comes from council is a number. It doesn't really reflect anything in and of itself. And I think one of the things we have to balance here is what that number means relative to organic growth in our population. And if our population grew last time by 6.5%, we're talking about trying to stay south of 3%. Something will be giving, and I'd like to hear from Dr. Schiller, Ms. High, and Mr. Kimball, what will those things be? My other question for you is, are you satisfied that a budget of this ballpark would be consistent with our policies and objectives? And I think the third thing that I'd throw out for the board and for the community as a whole is, it's important to understand that the growth rate in the school population, the people we serve, is about 10 times what the growth rate in is in the city as a whole. And so I think it's also a fiction to say that the organic revenue growth necessarily should be split dollar for the general government, dollar for the schools. If the needs are greater, if the growth is greater on the school side, another way to stay within this 2.7% is to have an asymmetric allocation of the amounts based on greater need. And I think that's a legitimate item for discussion, and I would like to hear what the relative merits are in terms of the budget drivers. I know there's plenty driving budgets on both sides, but I think if you balance the raw facts of what we're coping with versus what general government is coping with, that maybe a different allocation is in order. I guess another question I would throw out is what will the loss of the HR director mean in terms of impact to our system? And again, should this be an either or maybe we need to bite the bullet and hire both?
Let me see if I can.
My recollection was that HR person was an important person. I think Ms. Minson mentioned that there could be significant programmatic impacts, and will we be taking on additional risk by not having that person?
Let me unpack some of the questions that you've asked, if I understand it. The 2.7%, which is what the city has allocated at this point to us and the other departments, the board has worked very hard at trying to accommodate all of your priorities as much as we can in terms of this. And I think at that point, we have to recognize, and what we've tried to understand, is there are a lot of unmet needs. And I think that's what you're wrestling over, is what we have wrestled with, is that acknowledge that every one of these requests that have been put out there, you've read the justifications, is an unmet need in order for this district to function as highly and effectively and efficiently as possible. All of those other tiers are things that are documented, requested by your principals, vetted by us, and I think arguably we could all agree we need these things. The district has gone for a long time in having people be spread very thinly, taking on more responsibilities than for which they have signed on for, or as time has gone on, have become more complicated. HR is the one department that does not have a director. We have a director for transportation, one for food services, one for facilities and security, and we can go on. The one department, the backbone of our district, are personnel. And as you know, the protocols for all aspects of human resources, from hiring to benefits, to evaluations, to allocation of staff, and we can go on, and Ms. High can explain that, is driven out of the HR. I'm not sure for how many years that Ms. High has had serving as an assistant superintendent district-wide. The main responsibility of driving your educational program, coupled with serving as the de facto director of HR. She does a marvelous job in doing that. But you wear those many hats. Arguably, and no reflection on Ms. High, there are some things that are not going to be done as well as she wants to have them done for the school district. One of the things that I have noticed since I've been here is that HR to me is a backbone of the functions of the district. The people who we hire, how they're evaluated, et cetera, is a very important piece. I just leave that out to you, that whether you were able to get that funded or not, it is an unmet need that has to be addressed in some fashion, either internally, externally, or next year go to the well again. I think the point coming before us right now is the fact that the hesitancy of anyone taking action here on a budget is driven by the new information that we are over. The bids that have come in are 21% higher than what was anticipated, which means that I will be asking you tonight for authorization and your approval for a sum of money that we go back to amend our CIP request to the city. That is what action has to be taken coming out of this, because the city, as you know, we went 2 weeks ago to present the CIP and we went in late. Well, now we have to amend that going forward to fund this project to a certain point. I think what you are aiming at, and maybe Mr. Castillo, if I'm not misreading, is how do you balance all these unmet needs with the understanding that we have to now go to the city and say, for us to go forward with the project, we need an additional X number of dollars. And I'll lay that out for you. So how much more can you expand? Now, do I disagree that we I can't disagree with you on any of the needs that we have here. All the way down to the assistant athletic director, the world languages, the kindergarten, they'll come. We can't fit any more of that under the 2.7. How high you want to go beyond that is, to me, unmet needs that need to be filled, not this year, then next year, and then the next year, in order for this district to function more effectively and efficiently so that we can support the teachers and all the staff and all the students as best as we can. And how to balance the reality of a limited amount of money and how much more taxes will be allowed. Did I leave anything out of what to respond? Do you want to do anything more about the HR or whatever? So I don't have an answer for you except the fact that we need all these things. I would like to move those things up, but I can't recommend to you to take anything else away from the 2.7. My best advice is to be prudent with what it is that you go after over and above the guidance this year. To open the door and to try to argue and rationally with the city council with regard to proportionate funding among the different departments, I think is a valid discussion to have, and I'm sure that board leadership and I will raise that issue on Friday with the finance committee of the city. But you have a deadline by which you have to approve a budget. And I guess my question before you, ladies and gentlemen, is that whether it's now or next week, Mr. Webb and Mr. Reitinger, you have a policy and political decision to make. I can't make that for you. To ask for a significant amount of above guidance might, in my judgment, undo a lot of the work that we've done for the last 3 months of building strong, open communications with the city council. I've spent time with Mr. Shields and others to explain to them that the budget we've put together, you can tear apart all you want. There's nothing that is not open, nor is there anything that isn't accounted for and we can justify. But there's a practical reality of how much more they're capable. You know, we had four of you were at the PTA-sponsored budget presentation the other night, and the same number of city council members were there. They heard everything. They've talked with me since then. They understand. Translating understanding into support and action is beyond my pay grade. I would recommend to you to judiciously go through tier 1, 2, and 3. And as a board, you know we need all these. It is like choosing which of your children do you love the most. I wouldn't want to put that to you, Ms. Gill, after today. And so I would just say is that in the board's best judgment, all of these, any of these you choose, you can't go wrong. We need them all. Just how far do you want to go?
Well, there's a great children's book called You're All My Favorites, so you might want to read that, Dr. Shar. So I'd like to put some brackets around the discussion so we can move forward. I think, Mr. Castillo, your point is very well taken. As you know, we've done some calculations, and if we just ask for what the city tried to give us last year, that's, you know, even after the $912,000 cut, in terms of per pupil funding, based on what the projections were and what we're now projecting we're going to get next year, we'd need another $1.4 million above guidance. But that would eat all of the, I think, money that the city's to get in, the growth it's going to get. So fair is one thing. You're right that this isn't fair, but we've got to make the politically valid decision, and I think it's smart for us to try, especially in a time when we're trying to build a new high school, to take into account affordability for the city and drawing the line. And we're all in each other's hands in terms of where we draw that line. I think if we, and my understanding was that there was general agreement last week to look to have the line drawn for the actual budget we submitted for about a penny above what the guidance was, which would be a 3.7% increase. If that's so, and if that remains people's general feeling, then since we've already decided, except for John has now raised something that he wants to put back into the 2.7 scenario as opposed to the 3.7 scenario, then we've got a few questions to go through. Ms. Gill has suggested swapping out the assistant HR person, which was in the 2.7, and taking it down for a unfunded need and moving back up the CTE.
Or was it a 3.7?
It was
Sorry.
3.7.
Okay, yeah. Moving to within the 3.7. Moving back up the program coordinator for ESOL, CTE, and gifted. And then Mr. Lawrence suggested a couple of things. He suggested moving the kindergarten and the para from the above guidance scenario to the within guidance scenario. But
I just want them funded. If we're willing to go a cent above guidance, which, as of last week I was certainly happy to, I'm happy to leave them where they are.
Because we need to figure out what we were going to move down then. Right. And then you suggested what amount for restoring substitutes?
I think the paras
It was $3,500.
$500.
So,
because we had taken out 20,000 from subs system-wide, and just for the Mount Daniel paras would be 3,500.
So I think
He's doing it now up there.
yeah, we actually, if we subbed in the program specialist, as was pointed out earlier, that's about $11,000 below the HR specialist. So that would enable fitting in of the restoring of those funds, I would think.
Yeah, well, under the 2.7, yes, that would work.
Okay.
I also went through these proposals in a fine-tooth comb. I had, I think, the same thought as Ms. Gill, that I thought the ESOL coordinator was really important, much as I think we need an assistant HR person, much as I also think we need a special education full-time coordinator to assist Ms. Skirmer. That was my other huge priority, but there's only so much you can do at one time, and I think if we're going to, as we are talking about, maybe doing a special education audit in sometime in the near future, then the need for a full-time coordinator might come out of that, like the need for an ESOL coordinator came out of the prior audit. So I guess, to deal with Ms. Gill's proposal, is there general agreement? I know Mr. Webb said there was with moving the program coordinator up into the 3.7 guidance scenario and leaving the assistant HR person as an unmet need?
I would like to have both. I think the HR post is you're talking about a division with several hundred employees and growing, and I think from a programmatic standpoint, again, unless I could be assured that we weren't, I think this position could easily pay for itself in terms of reduced risk, increased efficiency, and compliance. So I would say, I'm mindful of and respectful of the constraints that we're in, but I think this would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Well, and I'd like to get numbers, because I'd like to see how much the people who are grouped under personnel have grown over the last 5 to 8 years.
Staffing or?
Well, whatever would fall under HR, because it seems to me we always talk about class size. At the high school, we talk about course load, and it seems like the course load for the person in charge of HR has been growing exponentially almost, and HR has not. So I haven't decided. I would love to have both, but I would also like to get numbers to find out, how many more people do you have to deal with? Because you've got, the full-time and the part-time and the subs and, different benefits and all this stuff, and it just gets more complicated and you get more people. So I would just like to know the numbers to see, how much more you're dealing with, because there is a tipping point, and once HR has a problem, it's not, okay, we've got an HR problem at TJ. Once central office has an HR problem, it's everybody has a problem, and we don't need that.
I agree with both of you gentlemen. I don't see how you can do everything, and as far as human resources goes, it involves legal issues, and you can't be playing, you can't be 100% on when you're involved in human resources. You have to be 100% involved. You can't be only giving part of your time. Not that you're not doing over and above what you are paid to do, but I'm saying you can only be spread so thin before that hammer is going to come down, and it will. I can tell you it will, and it worries me to not have this position, especially with the growth that we have in our school system. I think we really need to fund this position, the human resources director.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I hear what's going on with the HR position, and I agree that is a position that I think needs to happen, but I have to be cognizant of what we're ultimately asking for. It would be great to be able to ask for both, but I know with the constraints that we have of what we're going to be able to ask for this year, I'm all for the 3.7 and shifting some stuff around. When talking with some members of council, I think there is a limitation of the split that's there. Yes, our population is growing faster than theirs, but ultimately their constituency is everybody in the city, and there is definitely some very clear hesitation of there's some agreement to make the shift a little bit more proportionate towards the schools, but there is a limitation of that proportion of how far down do their priorities go. So I think we do have to be very, very cautious about the apps that we're sending over, because I even think with the 3.7 that we're talking about, I think there's going to be, I'm glad we have justifications to justify what we're asking for, because there are still some members of council who ultimately won't vote for a tax increase, even though it's pennies potentially that we're talking about. But there are those members of council who use that fiscal conservatism and said that they do not want to raise taxes. So I think we have to be really cautious about what we ask for. I think the HR position is something that definitely, when we have a new permanent superintendent, that definitely is going to be something that I'm quite sure will come back to the table again, and I think it has to get addressed. But I'm trying to look at it from the long-term range of us taking care of what we have to do this year, in addition to a fairly significant capital project, and with the information that we are going to talk about this evening with Mount Daniel, that we may have to make some adjustments to our CIP. I think we really have to be cautious about what we're working towards. Thanks.
Thank you. So, I'm certainly willing to go along with the majority of the board. I do have concerns about going above 3.7. I think the higher we go above 3.4, 3.5, the more likely the scenario is that we get guidance. So I'm not disposed to try to put both of them in. My preference would be if we think the assistant HR has to go in, then we've got to find something else that comes out. But I think the closer we get to 4 for the transfer increase, we exponentially are increasing the likelihood of not getting anything above 2.7. And I take Mr. Webb's cautions about needing to come in with the right, more than parsimonious requests because of the need for the capital project. If we are still need to cogitate on this, I mean, I think we could kick this one question down the road until next Tuesday to see if we, thinking about it over the week, we have more consensus on whether we want to go with the HR position, the coordinator position, or both. Or we can proceed to do a vote tonight if people want to push to that. I'd rather reach a point where we are all in agreement on what's in the budget, and I don't think we're in that position yet, nor do I think we will get into that position this evening. Let's go.
My preference would be just to settle this matter tonight. And I know that we could use an assistant HR director, but I cannot ignore the results of that audit and our students are not passing SOLs at the average, Virginia state average. So anything we can do to assist those parents and assist those students, to me, we have to do it. And I agree that I don't think we can come in over 3.7. I would not advocate putting both of them in. I don't think we can do that.
Mr. Akuma?
Go around. Go do one more round.
Actually, I think Lisa wanted to say something.
Lisa?
Yeah.
I mean, Ms. Gill, I totally agree with you. The ESOL coordinator or the program specialist is key. I mean, being over instruction as well. I mean, that is, those students that we want to make sure that we provide what's needed for those. So that's why I'm actually sitting quiet, because I think we need both, but I understand that may not be able to happen. And so I don't want to necessarily say one or the other because they both are needed. But of course, kids are always first for me.
Ms. High, to what extent, if the board was able to go over guidance and city granted money for us to have this specialist for ESOL and gifted,
NCTE.
to what extent would that have an impact on what responsibilities you currently have in light of especially HR?
Well, I would foresee making some changes in my current staffing that I have in the office, and maybe having that program specialist be able to take on some of the roles that I have other people doing, therefore maybe being able to kind of restructure and, again, work with some of the compliance things that can fall to the HR side. So definitely having either position will help us look at restructuring the department as a whole, because we're one family. Curriculum and personnel is one family, so we would do some restructuring there. So either way, it's going to be helpful.
Mr. Webb? Anything to add?
I think I've kind of made my point for the evening. I would like, as you like to have a little bit more consensus, but I am willing to move forward tonight if that is consensus of the board to move forward with voting on the budget this evening.
Mr. Lawrence?
Well, I mean, I clearly don't want to vote on the budget tonight, and I don't think we should until we figure out how Mount Daniel actually factors into this. So I would oppose taking a vote tonight unless we've decided we're going to take a vote on the budget, because I think doing anything other than that would make no sense.
So let me, I don't think what Ms. Gill was saying that she wanted to approve the budget tonight. I think what she's saying is she wanted a decision on what goes into the final budget that we will formally approve next week. So
Well, that's my point. If we're in effect voting tonight to decide what's going to go into our final budget to vote on next week, to me, we're taking a vote on the budget, which I just don't think we should do unless we're going to take a vote on the budget and say, this is the budget. Not, this is the pre-vote to the final vote. We, I think, have a general consensus.
I actually don't think, well, I'm sorry, please, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I think we have a general consensus. It's a question of how far above guidance do we go and how does Mount Daniel factor in? And, you know, the rest are details that I think we need to be prepared to make the final hard decisions on next week.
And Mr. Lawrence, historically, what's happened is, in many regards, this is serving as the final school board budget work session prior to passing its request on to the city manager for inclusion in his recommended budget. You know, historically, what has happened is, you know, we've gotten a general, you know, like a straw poll. There hasn't been an official vote, but a straw poll about what's in and what's out. And I think, you know, the end in mind here is that next week, all things being equal, you know, we will be able to provide, staff will be able to provide the board with a detailed line item budget document, which, you know, given recent information and the environment here, may change. And it may be that, you know, we produce this budget document and then something changes, and then ultimately what the board would vote on are just, you know, totals on the budget, and which, you know, I can calculate, but it does take a while to go back and change the line items. And I don't want to put words in Mr. Reidinger's mouth, but I think that's the intent here, really to have that document ready for the board, and if it has to change, you know, so be it.
No, I mean, I know that's how we've normally done it. We just haven't had a wrench quite this big thrown in at this hour before.
It's not a good sound. Correct.
So here's what I would suggest we do. It seems to me that we have substantial agreement with, I think we have consensus with one exception, and that is whether to request only the CTE gifted ESOL program specialist or also to request the assistant HR. I think I've heard no disagreement with John's point about adding the money back in for the sub, and I've heard no disagreement, I think, about ensuring that we've got the ESOL coordinator position. In terms of what budget, since we're not going to approve a budget until next week, I'm happy to take a straw poll on whether people would want to see the assistant HR person in the budget to be included in the budget, to be prepared next week for final vote next week, or not. But I think it would be better if we could to give, you know, let Hunter prepare one budget, which of course is subject to change next week. It's not final, but the guidance in terms of what that budget ought to be. Shall we do a straw poll on whether to include the? Okay, I see no real, Mr. Ankuma.
So, what are we leaving in? The money, but not the position?
No. I think we've got substantial agreement on every item for both the guidance scenario and for the above guidance scenario. Mm-hmm. We've got the documents that were prepared in advance are in line with everything we've talked about, with three possible changes. One, the CTE, ESOL, and gifted coordinator would be moved to within the above guidance scenario. Mm-hmm. Two, we would add the money, as Mr. Lawrence suggested, for the subs back into the budget to ensure we had enough money for subs.
This is the $3,500.
Yes.
Yes.
The para subs, right?
Right, parasub. And then the question on which we would vote is for the budget to be, not vote, we would have a straw poll. We get the sense of the board, whatever you want to say, in terms of whether or not we would want to maintain the assistant HR position in the above guidance scenario or not. And then we have a final vote on the budget next week.
Okay.
Okay, I gonna lead into that because I didn't, in further discussion after I was made my point about the HR position, it seems that if we do add, which we hopefully will be able to add the ESOL and gifted program specialist, that will lighten your load as far as the ESOL part of your job goes.
I would do some restructuring in order to move some things around to have some more support in HR.
Okay, so that,
With my current staff.
how do you feel? I'd like to know how you feel about that. Like, how do you think that will play out for you? And no, I don't mean to put you on the hot seat, but I need to know, when I make my decision. I want to know what impact this is going to have on central office, on HR.
I can't, I'm not Ms. Hyde's attorney, so I can't tell her not to answer. I have to say that I think that's maybe an unfair question where she's sitting next to her boss.
No, I know.
So maybe you guys could have
True.
coffee sometime in the coming week.
I know.
He's taking the fifth, in other words.
Come on, you don't care. She wants to be honest.
Drinking a fifth.
No, I just feel like I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go like overstep my boundaries on that question, except that I just feel like if we are going to be adding the program specialist, and it is going to be restructuring things in central office as far as the ESOL and human resources go, it would make it more palatable to me if we couldn't include the HR specialist. That makes sense to anybody without putting you in the hot seat again.
Let's try it this way. Let's say you had a friend in another district. But in all seriousness, if the ESOL, CTE, GT coordinator you say you'd make some adjustments. My concern is frankly about HR associated risks, and I think I don't want this. I'm concerned that we haven't discussed this enough to know whether or not we're saving money or just playing Russian roulette. And if there is a true economy and there's a synergy that this will open up. This will allow you to restructure constructively, then that's one thing. But if this has been something that we should have done 5 years ago, then that's a horse of a different color.
And then so it goes back to my concern. I'm concerned about the liability that not having a human resources director, what that poses to our district and ultimately on our budget. So it's a tough place to be.
So I'm left with the question then of whether we should go ahead with not including the HR director or whether you would like to construct a straw poll. And I'm looking at Mr. Castillo and Mr. Lawrence as the two main speakers in favor of including possibly both positions. Mr. Lawrence?
The main question is, right now on board docs, we've got the document that has basically that document. That's rather silly. So what you're talking about is doing everything down to where we come in with the 4,200 up on bottom of page 3, Hunter?
That's with the 2.7, yes.
The 2.7.
That's the 2.7. Okay.
And then when you say above guidance, which positions are you talking about? If you could just
The tier 1 positions.
right. So we are including world language.
Yes.
Right
Kindergarten, para, admin support for Jesse Thackeray.
Yes.
We are doing the ESOL teacher as
Yes.
well as the ESOL coordinator.
Yes.
And
No,
what?
that's where it stops for your 3.7%,
Unless
No,
you
but
move HR.
unless you move the HR.
Down and
I
put
know.
the ESOL
That's why I
specialist.
hadn't said HR yet.
Yeah.
So basically, those minus HR would get you to the 1 cent.
Yes.
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 The same
yes,
way this
right
does.
here.
Yes.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make clear.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, for moving forward now, because honestly, we're not really voting on it, I would be fine to move forward on that basis. I still would like to get the numbers about how, you know, the people who qualify as being under HR have grown over the last 5 to 8 years, just so that we all know. Yeah. But if getting a few positions here and there let you do some good restructuring, then, you know, maybe we can go forward without it. But for now, leaving out the HR position, I'd be fine with.
Right. Mr. Casey, is that okay with you?
If I can just get some more comfort level about the risk issues.
Okay. So if we could get that additional information for the next meeting where we're going to formally approve the budget, I think that would be great. It is a little chill in here, isn't it?
Yeah. Every time it happens, Sevi runs away.
With that, I don't think there's any need for further discussion on the food service budget or the community service budget, because we're going to formally approve those next week, unless any one of the board members have questions about either of those items. Then let's move. Yes? Okay, then let's.
I just want to remind the board that this team coming on now of approving for next week, that we are going to have a fairly long overall day with these earlier in the evening that we have to do.
Yes.
Next week?
Yes.
Yeah, we've got a meeting starts at 4 next week.
All right. Thank you, sir. So let's go then to the GMMEH campus project topic, including a possible resolution. Dr. Schiller? Let's keep going on the agenda. We've already approved the agenda.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to have Mr. Bob Jones join us here at the table so we could talk through a couple of matters with you. Last week, I had introduced to you a schedule and a rationale for going forward with a statement of work for a feasibility study for the George Mason High School campus. And he and I have sketched out and wanted to share with you the rationale behind the schedule that we are proposing, and perhaps how this may help us if we went in this direction, or if the board chooses to go in another direction, to please advise us. Robert, you want to talk a little bit about the Arcadis and what we have put together with regard to going forward with this feasibility study?
Yeah, I think the main benefit of the feasibility study is just to give more confidence that the solution, you know, when we actually do go to whatever type of solicitation we use to, you know, go ahead with the project, it just gives more confidence that the solution that we're asking for is viable, and also gives you more details so that you can do a more detailed cost estimate and really evaluate the impacts. What I would suggest, if we do go ahead with the feasibility study, is to come up with 1 or 2 main scenarios that you would like them to explore. And within those scenarios, we can do, you know, a few options, but to have them fully explore 1 or 2 main options. And even if the final result doesn't match one of those options exactly, it'll still give you a much clearer understanding of, you know, what it means. To actually have the architect do basically a conceptual design of what might work, where they'll actually lay out all the rooms, verify the program, and, you know, do the site layout and give a much better idea of what a final result would actually look like.
Mr. Lawrence?
Now, in terms of the word feasibility, this is feasibility that something can fit, or is it also feasibility that it can fit within a certain budget?
Both. I think it would be the feasibility just make sure that what you're asking for program-wise will lay out and how everything will fit together. And then based on that feasibility, we can do a more detailed cost estimate to verify the cost after the feasibility is done, so that you know you have a more defined, more designed solution to the estimate on. And it'll be more than just, square foot models at that point.
Right, which makes complete sense, but would that second part be part of the feasibility, or would that be a follow-on for somebody who's good with numbers after the feasibility study? That's my question.
We could do that either way. The architect would generally have a subcontractor do an estimate through them or through someone else.
Okay.
I think Mr. Lawrence's point is an important one. There are really, it seems to me, two paths we can go on at this point. We've, without ever, having a formal board resolution on it, I think we've reached general consensus that we want to do not phased construction and not renovation, but primarily do a new high school build for what we can afford. And then there are a bunch of options that do involve some renovation, including other uses of the A wing and different things that we could do with the building. We heard a lot during public comment about the competition gym and whether that would be included or not, that being a fairly big ticket item. So it seems to me that the two paths we can go on are, if we are still targeting a referendum in November of this year, which I think we need to continue to work towards, because I think we need to replace George Mason. But if we're working on that, the two paths we could go on are either going directly to some sort of PPEA RFP with some different ad alternates and asking people to give us proposals, or a feasibility study that would also explore those same sort of options. The advantages and disadvantages, it seems to me, are that with the PPEA, the cost is arguably borne by people other than us, but you lose the transparency and the certainty that you might get with a feasibility study that would let you share the results with the public and help you create an RFP that could be much more public and open. But both should, the feasibility study only has value to me if it gives you the cost numbers, much more reliable cost numbers that could be used to design a referendum in lieu of a PPEA RFP that would give you much more certainty about numbers, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. I think another benefit of the feasibility is it will allow you to write a much better RFP. I think the way we approached it before, when it was just all a brand new building, all one building, that and you knew what the program was going in. You didn't really need the feasibility study up front because it was a much more, simpler solution. But I think if we want to try and work in some of these other scenarios, it will be important to fully understand what that means as far as what spaces end up where.
Mr. Nkoma?
Are we not doing a feasibility for a one building, a standalone building? I assume the feasibility and subsequent costing and or both are based on the proposal that Dr. Schiller came up with. So wouldn't that be a standalone building?
Well, that would be, if you wanted to do, say, two scenarios for the architect to look at, you could do the standalone building and then maybe an option that, has some things, some of the other options. The best benefit, if you're just doing the brand new building, I think the best benefit of the feasibility would be a program verification. To have an architect actually, go through the program, verify that, the program's correct for what you're looking for to do. Do that exercise of verifying the program will be the main benefit for just the one new building.
If I could augment that, Mr. Ankuma, to your point, I've been working with staff, Matt Hills and high school staff, and even today for an hour and a half, the Booster Club and our AD and our phys ed department head going through everything and detailing and looking one more time. And as those folks had pointed out, some of the things that we looked at, there have been some misperceptions that we've all had. But one of the things that was very important with today is Mr. Danny Schlitt is that right?
Danny Schlitt, yes.
Right, from Recreation was a full participant in this discussion because we have to factor in recreation from the city. And so if a feasibility study would be, here's your standalone new high school and here is the wrestling room and the gym and your auxiliary gym. If a cost analysis was such that if you wanted to consider keeping our 2 auxiliary gyms and building a competition gym, that would be one of the things that could be looked at as an option if that might provide even more recreation, as it turns out, more phys ed and more athletic opportunities to use those facilities. So, but as Robert just mentioned, is that we could do all we can to envision the school of the future, and that's what I'm charging our folks with, and that's what we're trying to do, and verifying how many classrooms we need, and making sure we have enough appropriate, functional, and flexible space so that when you're in there in 2026, 2022, 2030, it's adaptable to any program direction you're going and pedagogical. For example, we have seen meteoric rise in the numbers in the hybrid program, the High-C program. What Matt and staff are telling me today of what they need is a far cry from what you looked at a year ago in terms of square footage and design. The numbers of actual classrooms, the robotics lab that we all had seen over at TJ, and we know what we have. So I'm trying to do the program needs that are going to build you the school for the future. But an architect's the one who could feasibly study the feasibility and say, well, we can do this, we can do that, and we can do this. I think it opens up what options we can work with, as well as a verification of the program we want. And for my money, I think I would have done this 4 or 5 months, 6 months ago, because we would have then known our limitations and then been asked those questions of, well, if we have but X number of dollars, what can we get? If we have but Y number of dollars. But at least an architect will explore these different questions that we might have of our wants and our needs. And as Ms. Neeson and others have said, is that, for example, to what extent can we need 2 more tennis courts in order to offer competition. 3 of the 4 are dysfunctional right now. The tennis courts, as we discussed today, are located in such a place that the underground water and foundation have eroded the tennis courts. If we're going to have 4 tennis courts and 6 tennis courts, it has to be, where is it feasible that it could be located? We have mapped out, which I will show you, exactly how many parking spaces that we currently have and where. Sevi did that for me today to identify, and I'm talking with Nancy Hendrickson. Yes, we have 17 bus spots that we have now, but we're projecting out 23 to 24 bus parking slots. Where will all this fit, along with all of the parking spots for cars that we would be displacing, depending upon where? So these are so many what-ifs and moving parts. We can get the program verification. We could look at, well, what if? What if there's a remote site we can move the buses and or cars? What does that mean for opening up for Falls Church Road, and with regard to maybe relocating the softball field? What What if? And how much would that cost? So for me, it would make me feel more comfortable for your district, after I'm not part of this, to have this information to craft a very tight upfront RFP and design that then you may be able to go forward with a much more confidence of what you may be able to get and what it may cost. That's why I've been familiar with this most of my career with this process, as opposed to having a lot of hopes and then having later on to dash them, knowing what is feasible up front.
Timeline and cost of the feasibility, any idea?
This is the timeline that you have in your docs that, if you would like, we can march you through to June 21. June 2021. If we hit these marks, we can get you, if you all do it down the road. That's why I urge you to get someone who's going to be managing this from a program side and everything else. You can be hitting, if we can hit each of these marks, you'll take us down to the referendum question of what you would have for information in what was it, July? I put my glasses on. If you follow me to here, under referendum, well, school board, under 10.190 and 10.210.
Well, but I think
we're looking at May, where you would be now, as a school board, evaluating the feasibility study, and for the school board and the city council from between May and middle of June, making a determination about the final project, and for the school board to then approve a final project, and then to finalize under 110, finalize referendum documents, end of June to July, the high school referendum readied to go forward, and a referendum vote you can hit by November if that's what you still wish to do. But it's a tight time frame. And
Well,
then
but-
from there it rolls out.
But before then, I think getting to Michael's question, in the next 2 weeks, we'd need to agree on what the scope of work was, put it out, people would have 2 weeks to respond, and we'd be evaluating responses for the feasibility study within a month.
Okay, if they can do it.
And the overall cost, Bob?
Should be around 100,000.
Yeah, and this was a long discussion at the last GM working group, and the consensus, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that everybody thought we should go forward down this path because it made sense to let us truth test where we're going to go.
Getting some support from city council for the funding.
We don't have any promises yet, I don't think. Mr. Castillo?
So at $100,000, this would be RFP'd, correct? Is that to go out under an RFP?
Yeah, the schedule currently shows us going out with a RFP process and getting proposals from architects.
And would the architect be able to bid on the final project?
Yes, I don't see any conflict of interest because they, once the feasibility study's done, they're not involved in writing the RFP or anything with the project after that. So their interest would be complete at the end of the feasibility study.
So their product will be open to anybody else who's willing to bid?
Yeah, everything that they do is public just because it's totally separate from the solicitation
Which
for the
allows
school.
them to be able to be part of to bid on it as well. Because
Right.
the information, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And why wouldn't we just hire somebody to help us write the RFP we need?
Well, I think it's more, the architect is the one who could, once a feasibility study is done and we see the results, we can better tailor the RFP around what the feasibility study tells us. You put the different restrictions and goals of what you're asking the design build teams to do.
So are we talking about a design build, or are we talking about a PPEA?
Well, yeah, PPEA, where you're basically hiring a design builder, an architect, contractor team. So we're not handing them a design. We're confirming what we're going to ask them to do in their designs. And it, I imagine the feasibility will be an attachment to the RFP as information, but it's not a requirement unless there's specific things that the feasibility study tells us that we want to make a requirement. We're not designing it for the teams. We're confirming that what we're asking them to do will work.
So under this approach, what would be put before the voters in terms of what would they be voting on? What would they have before them? Would they have a completed design of the proposed high school at referendum?
No, I think what they would have at that point would just be, this is what we're looking to do. This is a conceptual design of what we want to do, along with, just conceptual renderings. And it's not that this is what the school is going to look like when we're all said and done, but this is the scope of what we're going to ask proposers to give us.
And what would we ask for in terms of amounts? In terms of, the referendum is all about a bond, right? We'd want authorization to issue bonds in the amount not to exceed X, right?
Yeah, that all depends on...
Feasibility study would set our number?
Yeah, I think it would help us set a more accurate number of what we want. And, help define what are we asking for is going to, the number of the referendum's going to be asking for is whatever the feasibility shows and what we decide the final project is going to be. We could approach it two different ways. You can give the architect a budget to work to, or we can ask him to run through the scenarios and do the estimate on the scenario. So depending on which way you want to go into the feasibility study.
Yeah, I guess my concern is going into referendum with and some have advocated this from the community, if we go in with something that is not fully formed, that to me could be problematic. And I continue to wonder, I think the feasibility of this project is known. I guess the details are not. And I think there's a lot of creativity that I wouldn't want to stifle the creativity by having a study that would somehow present foregone conclusions. If somebody wants to do a maglev tennis court on the roof of the high school and they can make it come in under budget, I want to hear about it. And so that, to me, the sooner we can get to, and the other thing is I want to hear from the people who are actually going to sign up to do this, as opposed to, studying it, because I think that's where the rubber's going to hit the road. And I think we need to get there sooner rather than later. My fear is if we go the feasibility study, we will not have a referendum on November. So, and maybe that's the price we're willing to pay. I don't know.
I think Mr. Castillo's concerns are somewhat similar to mine. I think I can see how the feasibility study gets us there. I want to work as hard as we can for that November referendum, and I'd like a little bit more comfort that a feasibility study will move the ball as far forward as a initial PPEA is. I think the feasibility study has a lot of advantages. Mr. Castillo, one of the points is that having gone through a PPEA once and then not proceeded, it's a sign that we're putting skin in the game. So we're going to be issuing an RFP that has more detail in it. What I really want to be able, I just think we have to be in a position by late June, early July, to say, to understand what the cost options are for different things. Like, how much is it with a competition gem and how much is it without a competition gem? so that we can test that against the willingness of the city council to approve a referendum, and then before we take it to the voters. And I'm comfortable in drafting up a feasibility study to see if it could, generate those things. But I'm not enough of an expert in the space to say the feasibility study is better or worse than the PPEA. And I know, Dr. Schiller, can you talk a little bit more about your experience with the feasibility studies and why you think it's the best idea?
Yes, sir. In the billions of dollars for which I've been responsible in new construction around the nation as a superintendent, a state superintendent, because everything had to flow through me for my approvals, the process that we have always used was to find out what is possible, what is feasible. And it's the notion of lots of folks wanting to have a lot of things, but not balancing all of the moving pieces of your limitations of site, affordability, as well as what are the options that maybe we haven't even looked at. And I guess my experience has been that those questions are first addressed before you get into anything else, knowing what could be done, what it could look like, and assuring that the program that you want, which is the driver here, is being accommodated. We don't know, for example, I'll give you some examples. We don't know if wrapping around the middle school, people have proposed that, building it around the middle school. Well, what if that is done? What happens then to parking, the practice fields, access, etc.? I don't know. Or what if a school is located running down Falls Church Road with the front facing Leesburg Highway and the back facing all the fields? Will the soil even allow such a presentation? We don't know. An architect in the feasibility study would be able to show what that might mean. We don't know where you can position an auditorium or a competition gym. We would want this, nor do we know what the costs of these are unless we define that we want an auditorium for 750 kids. We want this competition gym that will be 94 feet, be able to seat 1,500, have these kinds of lockers, have these kinds of facilities that we do. And I know, you walked with me, the locker room facility and the weight room. It's deplorable. And you look at it from three prongs of, and I'm picking on the athletic program because you have facilities now that do not support your academic or your recreation, nor your phys ed and competition programs. You just don't have that. Well, what could be done? Where could it be all positioned? Similarly, we don't have an answer to the parking. We don't have an answer for field layout. The need for the practice field that's there. We don't know those things. I'm not so sure how we write an RFP unless we have some greater knowledge. That's beyond me. My experience has always been that part of this we could write into the RFP for the feasibility study is not only the cost estimate, but conceptual design, so we're actually seeing. And to what extent, Robert, my experience has been that that is what you go to with the referendum. That this is, like you said, this is what it looks like, folks. This is the kind of program that we're going to be able to deliver. This is what we can or cannot do with parking. This is what we can or cannot do with our field placement. I mean, to what extent do we want to keep this, I forget how high the netting is in the baseball field. Yeah, the 80 feet where it is. Do we want that location there for the softball field or not? What can we do with the mulch city field or dump area? What can we place there? How do we position tennis courts? There are a lot of moving pieces so that we all know. Today I learned from the folks that we went through every step of every piece of our program there. You know how you've had money into that original discussion for a new competition soccer field? Now, if I say it wrong, Tom, tell me. The folks are not saying we need a whole new competition field, particularly with the grade and the drop-off there. Just from a phys ed and recreation, Danny, and from a athletic perspective, that practice field is essential. But given the weather that we have, the grass mud field that we have is dysfunctional. So, for X number of dollars, we can find out we can do to put a turf field back there. But what good is it to put the turf field back there if the school's facility is going to wrap around? And so these are the pieces that we could try to define real tightly here, make decisions here, and go right to an RFP. I just don't know to what extent, one, if we can accommodate all this and be in the right place for what would come back to us. My comfort level has always been to know what's possible, what's feasible, and what it would cost, to then place before my board or before me to say, in, out, yes, this is what we can do for 70, 80, 90, $100 million. If you want to spend 70, this is what you get. If you want to spend 80, this is what more you can get. If you want to spend 90, this is what you can get. And then that's the policy decision. So I guess it's just my experience over so many years and billions of dollars of construction to work. And again, I would reiterate, if I had this information up front, I can then decide also for the feasibility, what kind of materials? Is modular something that would be considered? What would that do for time and cost? I don't know that. But there are a lot of things that we could ask and put into that. If you want to go to the RFP right away, you know, tell us, help me make you tell me what you want included, and we'll put it out there. I'm a little concerned that we get some surprises back. Whereas I think my insurance policy would be that someone who's highly qualified, who has done this before, has given me some of the parameters that you can now put on this table come, April, May, and you then can make better informed decisions than we've been able to make up to this point. That's my only feel for it, sir. Whatever, if you want to hit the timeline, we need a direction, and just tell us and we'll do our level best and give us, if you say we go right to the RFP, then I need definitive action as to what you want in it. If you say you go to feasibility, you can give the broader parameters and help, and I'll bring back to you right quick all the stuff that our staff is churning out for me so that we can help structure and you can help edit the statement of work. Either way, I just need the direction and we'll do it. And whatever the board's comfortable with is fine with me. I do think that if you want to move on this, then basically decide on a process and be prepared to help define some of those expectations. I don't have as much experience. I've got lots of experience with design build. I mean, that's what's happening in fast-growing communities and states, even where I live, with all the increased population. You know, that's their model. Just over the weekend, I was home reading through the local paper because they're adding 10,000 students a year. And so they have to churn it out all of the time, and they're rubber stamping, not rubber stamping, rather cookie cutting. In elementary schools and elementary schools and elementary school, wherever the community is growing, that's what they're building. High school, middle school, they all look alike. It cuts down lots of cost. This is in my judgment, a much more customized approach. In Michigan, Illinois, you know what the centerpiece is for the school and community? Your indoor pool. Whether it's in Evanston, New Trier, or Springfield, Illinois. They start with the basis that it's not the auditorium, it's for the community year-round use and students, is the pool. That's the Midwest way of starting a lot of these projects. Right, Tom? Absolutely. Yeah. I can tell you what it is in California, because I helped work out there last several years. Inexpensive, get it out because we've got so many students coming in, we got to get the school open. You know, I had to sign off on billions of dollars on new construction in Los Angeles in 2007, 8, and 9. And it was, you know, it was a whole different concept. Got to get it going. Bring it in, but you had to be cut the money, you know, and go up to the legislature and argue for more money to get. But we had to turn it in. But every community, this one's a little unique. Look at the shape we're studying today, the physical shape of of what we have to work with on the grounds. The other day, Jim Snyder, planning director, took me around to about 5 or 6 other schools in the area, looking at Wakefield, looking at Washington Lee, and I can't remember the names of them, you know, with cantilever parking over Route 66. Well, maybe we would get cantilevered parking over Route 66. Maybe put a tennis court on top of that. I don't know. But almost every
That's for Arlington, not us.
Yeah, that's right. But what strikes me is the fact that every school that we've looked at in here are dealing with almost rectangular or square plots. We're not. It makes our challenge a little less, and if you subtract 8 to 10 acres of our, 36 acres we have? It makes our challenge even greater of where we can put things. Someone reminded me today, tennis courts were originally where the...
MEH is.
MEH.
No, before that, the parking was.
Yeah.
Out front. Well, we don't have that option anymore. Assuming there's going to be economic development on a part of that. So our options are limited, folks. And if we want to preserve fields, then our options are even more limited. If we want to be as economical and affordable, but keep our eye on the ball, it keeps winnowing down what we can do. I just don't know what is feasible. So I know I can deliver this for you and hit the numbers for getting your RFP out for either a feasibility study or what. You know, Bob's just going to have to give us more time. But we, you know, my staff and I will put this together for you. Just tell us how you want to go as a direction, and we'll knock it out for you.
Mr. Nkuma?
Do we have the money to fund the feasibility?
Of course not. We'll find it in some way.
Okay.
Okay, you know, we'll, this is a partnership with the city, is that correct? Okay, I mean, there are some moving pieces here that I'll talk about later in light of Mount Daniel. And, you know, what I've had Hunter doing all weekend is scrubbing our budget here from other capital projects and whatever else we might be able to do, and to see if there's anything there. But, you know, you know this budget as well as I do.
But would it be us paying for it?
I don't know that.
Previously, when we've had, you know, the RTKL study and we've had other things, the GM task force had its own budget, Michael. So it wasn't coming directly out of us. It was something where the city put in money and then we both controlled how it was spent on consultants.
I love the idea. I just don't know when we're getting the money.
Well, there was money that was the city and the school board paid when someone decided to employ the facilitators 4 or 5 months ago. Okay.
We got some cash there?
I'm sorry?
We have some money there?
We don't have any money left there.
Oh.
But I'm just saying is that I don't know the process by how that money was identified, but we get the invoices.
As always.
So going back to the question of the feasibility study, John, can you and Aaron maybe talk a little bit about where the working group is on this? You mentioned before that it supported the idea of a feasibility study?
Yeah, I mean...
I wasn't at the last meeting.
Yeah.
Because I was sick, but John can.
Yeah, I mean, and Bob, you know, chime in. Yeah, we talked a lot about it, and this seemed to be a way to get more granularity and more confidence in the numbers to head toward an RFP. Because I think the feeling was leaping straight to an RFP, you've got to define so much that we can't really define right now that's sort of setting yourself up for failure. So, I mean, the working group, did anyone disagree that you can remember about
No, I
going
think
forward with the
the
RFP?
city manager was in agreement with that. We're meeting again tomorrow, Thursday, right?
Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
biggest concern was just, can we move fast enough? Because the idea was this thing gets put out on, what, February 27th? Well, that's not going to happen. Within 2 weeks, and then people only have 2 weeks to respond. So there's even talk about, once we know we're going this way, send out a sort of a save the date to, the community who would get the feasibility study bid to say, hey, this is coming, so you've only got 2 weeks. Once it hits the street, don't be surprised by it. But the working group fully supported it.
So we clearly need a sense of the board on whether we want to pursue a feasibility study. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment on that?
I like the idea for one simple reason. It will provide a lot more of that. Is the word certainty? Maybe it's not certainty, but clarity for decisions to be made, like you said, Dr. Schiller, on the actual RFP. Because it probably will clear a lot of the cobwebs as to what is it going to look like. Well, here it is. There's a feasibility. So can we move forward on it? So for me, it's a great idea. If you can manage the timeline, even better. Just finding the money to pay for it.
Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could really help with community buy-in into the project. If we do the feasibility, they can really see what's feasible. I think that will encourage people to get more behind the referendum.
Margaret?
Yeah, I like the idea of it. Again, it's where the money is coming from. But when you compare how much money we're going to be spending, this is a tiny investment, and I think if we're going to do this, we should do it right and do the study.
Castillo?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about doing testing for soil quality and things like that, I have a hard time seeing that 23 days is going to cut it. If I were an architect and based on my 0 years of experience in the field, I wouldn't step up to something like that in 3 weeks. So I think we need to ask ourselves, is that enough time to get a quality?
I think the feasibility study is more of the program verification and also just layout of the building and the site. I didn't envision this with any, detailed soil testing in that area, and or, major site investigations other than the existing documents we had. I didn't envision that as being part of it.
So it's basically just like a test fit kind of exercise, essentially?
Yes. Yeah, more of I think the program verification is an important part so that we're sizing what we ask for in the RFP properly. And then it's more of basically a conceptual design, how all the rooms would lay out, a possibility of, how this thing would look, as well as verifying that we can fit the school and the fields and the parking and everything on the site, and verify how much of the site would be left over with that particular scenario.
Yeah, and the thing that I struggle with is in some of these last proposals or notional presentations, there are ideas that, we can use some off-site parking space. There's the WMATA garage, there's the UVA, Virginia Tech site. And some of that is the space on the grids is there. It's just a question of inking the deal with the interested parties. And I think, one of the big challenges will be getting somebody who will be able to actually get somebody to sign on the dotted line and say, I've got your parking secured, it's going in this part of the site. And I think the feasibility study can tell you what is possible, but we'll still be begging the question of, can we get buy-in from the necessary interested parties? I guess we have to ask ourselves from a scope standpoint, is a test fit all that we want? Do we want to know what the soil is like? I know there are a lot of stories about bed springs and animal carcasses that were found when MEH was constructed, and nobody said that we're on a fault line or something that raises grave concerns about the feasibility of moving dirt around. But to me, the feasibility study isn't going to be what we can fit on our site. It's going to be what we can fit not on our site. And they can tell us options, but they can't secure us the space. So, I'm not opposed to this. I think it's going to blow our timeline for the November referendum, and if that's the case, then, so be it. But I think we need to go into it with our eyes open on that.
Mr. Lawrence?
Well, just one word on the timeline. I think, and if you've been in the working group discussions, I think if we don't go down this route, I think that blows our timeline, because then people will say, okay, now we have to go back and rethink everything, and I think that would be more negative. So, but I see this as a good way to get more certainty, more clarity, and that's what people want. We're never going to get 100% certainty that you can absolutely 100%, put this right here in a feasibility study, but we need more than we've got now.
Mr. Webb?
Mr. Webb?
I had to get you off mute, but I agree with Mr. Lawrence that I think we need to start moving down this road to at least make the get some information to actually see what what may not fit. We'll never get to 100% so the actual building, but I think if we get to actual information, I think we're much better off that way than not doing it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Webb. So it seems to me the sense of the board is we'd like.
All right,
go ahead.
Could I just raise the other thing about whatever this product of the working group would be is I don't want it to be an anchor that gets us ignoring other more creative possibilities. So I really would hope that our RFP says, if you can build it and make it work, we will entertain it. So that's the only other thing that gives me a little bit of pause.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Castillo.
Thank you.
It seems to me that the sense of the board is that we'd like to pursue this. So the question is, and I can't ask Dr. Schiller here because he had to step out for a moment, but since we're not approving the RFP right now, it's got to be written, what does the schools and Arcadis need from us to prepare? What decisions do you want us to make tonight? What guidance do you want tonight to prepare the RFP for the feasibility study?
I think we would like if we want the architect to look at two main scenarios of how to deliver the school program, whether one scenario is the entire program in a new facility, and the second scenario is, just some of the different options that have been discussed, whether, we use the two gyms or, just all the different variations that we've looked at. If we could come up with two main scenarios and then different options under each scenario, but, to have them explore, just a couple alternatives.
So it's hard, I don't know about the rest of the folks, it's kind of hard for me to answer that question because there's, with the way the questions are written out now, there's literally probably hundreds of different scenarios. It seems to me that the general notion is that we want to do a study on a single-phase construction base building with, this is probably one scenario, with different things added or not. So for example, what would it cost with a competition gym and what would it cost without a competition gym? So that we have some greater certainty so that we can make a judgment about what to go into the would go into the eventual RFP and the bond issue. So what amount would we ask for? The other large category of things, which I don't know if it qualifies as a certain scenario, is the idea of using parts of the A-wing for different purposes, or parts or the gyms or cafeterias for additional purposes. If we're trying to just pick a couple of those, I'm sure that's in line with what you wrote out. I'm not really sure I can answer the question yet. We do have the sense of the board that we'd like to pursue the feasibility study. We'd like, I think, an RFP for that prepared. The question that I was asking Mr. Jones is, what do you need from us? What questions do you need answered? Not questions that would be answered by the feasibility study, but to prepare the RFP for what the feasibility study says.
I think you answered my question right there with the two options.
I think it's good.
Well, could I maybe frame it this way? That what we want is a base request for a 1,200 student school, right, with a common space area to accommodate 1,500, and that we're looking at also the appropriate parking, assuming that we don't have an alternative place to put parking. If we do, that space could be repurposed. But we have to count on some form of parking there. We have no other option on the table today. Would we agree to that? That we would want space for MEHS, because that is what you've discussed, unless you want to take that off the table, but not in the base plan. Remember, we've talked about 20,000 new square feet. I don't know if you want that in the base question or not. Or look at an option, as we have said, a wing may be accommodating that swing space, or even the 1,200 student school, since you don't need the 1,200 student capacity immediately to serve as that swing space. I'm working with staff. I'd bring back to you to define what we believe the number of classrooms that would be necessary, the kind of general space and classroom space for each area, each discipline, how many art rooms, robotics lab, the high C space, how we would want. The architect would then place it and design it. But what we're trying to do is to define, this is the base school, that the auditorium, we've been working with seating for 750 unless you wish to go otherwise, but perhaps with future options to expand that auditorium to accommodate the 1,200 to 1,500. So we know that maybe the auditorium, and we would like that the auditorium be easily accessible, maybe a shared space with the middle school, since they don't have an auditorium. Looking at certain options, whether you preserve and use or repurpose the cafeteria that we currently have now as an alternative food site, because as we have seen, like at our visit to TJ, that we're not looking at any longer construction with schools that have just one base cafeteria where all kids sit at one place, but you have multiple food opportunities and a much more of an open environment, grab-and-go sandwiches, salads, working in small groups, large groups in different areas, whether the cafeteria that we now have can be repurposed in that way and maybe cut down on the full new cafeteria or maybe multiple food stations. So, these are the things that we're looking at. The cost of a competition gym, and what's the effect of, do we add the auxiliary gym, a new wrestling room, a new fitness center, or do we find a way cost effectively to, if we can't afford all that at one shot, to repurpose and be able to integrate the use of the existing two auxiliary gyms. So I think as we would work down here is that I think we can define this, but there are some fundamental questions that the board will need. But we've said, I think we have agreement on, okay, we don't want to phase it, we don't want to think, but we want to allow for future expansion, future possibilities. Should the enrollment take off in 2032, you don't want to say, oops, we don't have a plan for where we would go with it, but could you also sketch that out? If indeed the competition gym is in, but from a cost factor, it can't be afforded today, how could that then be reevaluated down the road while you're using what you currently have? We know what we want. 67 students today from middle school access courses in the high school. So if you think that as a model for the future of more of that, architect could start thinking about ease of accessibility between buildings. Notion, that you want to maximize and not lose, if possible, any of your outdoor field space, if possible, because you can't replace that, and that I guess we have to determine for certain that there's land that is in that access of the current footprint, bordered by Haycock and Leesburg, that has to be reserved, set aside for possible other uses, so that the architect would know what's off limit and what could be considered in light of the potential economic development of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 acres. So, we know that we want it to be energy efficient. What could be done there, and maybe what materials could be as options to be used. I think the important thing is that we define clearly what our school of the future should look like with the flexibility and adaptability, so that it can adapt to program changes down the road as best as we can see. So if we're working from that base assumption, I will continue on my way with the staff and bring to you right quick our best estimate now of the square footage, the kind of square footage we need, the options that could be there, and then you and Bob and I in the very near future could then formulate what go out in the street on an SOW.
So let me spill back, Dr. Schiller, to what questions you need answered today, because I think that's a very good summary of a lot of the issues. I have trouble fitting that into just a few scenarios.
Yes.
So, it can fit within a few scenarios if there's multiple sub-pieces.
Yes.
I just don't know what's possible to do in the feasibility study. I mean, it occurs to me, if I had to make 3 big chunks, I can't get it down to 2 big chunks. I can get it to 3 big chunks. The 3 big chunks are base school with all the things you talked about, base school plus MEH expansion, and base school plus repurposing some of the existing facilities, either A-wing and or gyms and or cafeteria space. Those are sort of the 3 big chunks that I think we probably wanted to explore, with all of the different stuff about parking and fields and that, But if you talk about competition gym or no competition gym, I can't get it down to even 10. So.
Well, I think I would hope that the feasibility study would tell us what is possible at a cost basis, so we're not sitting here making a judgment about 1 gym, 3 gyms, 2 gyms, but rather this is what we can afford, and this is the size and how it could be positioned. Why should we argue about what we all know we want the best, but can it be included? And I think that's what we would ask the Bob, am I going too far about these kinds of things?
No, and I think I have enough information where I can take a pretty good shot at writing a 2-scenario statement of work.
Can you then, so we use our time as efficiently as possible. Are there other questions that you need us to answer today to write that draft RFP for the feasibility study?
No, I think I can get a good draft for that.
Mr. Castillo?
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but seems to me I can take your issues and put them into 3 buckets. There's the what, there's the how, and there's the cost. It seems to me I'm kind of hearing that we know pretty much what the what is. And so then the question is the how and the cost. And when you get to scenarios, again, I get concerned that we're going to get fixated on those scenarios at the expense of other options. And so I ask this question, either are we really saying, is the feasibility study truly, can this be done? Or is it more, we do want to request for solutions kind of thing, in which case, would we want to put this out to more than one architect? Or alternatively, if you did a 2-phase RFP with a conceptual solution with how are you going to get to the what, at what notional cost, and then the detailed, after we say, okay, can you shift this, can you move that, can you add this, can you reduce that, then you go to the detailed RFP. Would that serve the same purpose in a different way?
I think the structure of this PPEA would be the conceptual RFP would be basically an RFQ, where the design teams would submit their qualifications, and we would probably shortlist 3 of those, and then those 3 in the detailed RFP would then present their conceptual designs and the cost, however we want to structure that. I think it would be hard to go out and get multiple firms to submit on the conceptual RFP just because of the cost it takes them to put it together and to do the conceptual. If you're one of 3 on a project this size, it makes sense to take the risk of spending $100,000 putting a proposal together. If it's wide open and you're one of 10, or whoever, how many want to come in, you'd be reluctant to put that investment into it when your odds are low of winning the job. So I don't think that the conceptual RFP will be able to give you what you want.
Well, no, my idea would be a wide open RFP with the down select at 3 after the conceptual, but maybe you're right, maybe you wouldn't get 10 to start with, so.
I think, though, what you're saying is that we're getting a much more clarity about the what, okay? And refined of how that space that we need lays out in terms of, in our mind, programmatically, much more definitive than we are today. We're getting there. How it can be accommodated is really what we're after. And if we can get all that we want, what is it going to cost? I see it, those kinds of things are the questions that I would like to ask and know. Can I get what we know the program needs and drives? Where can it be and how it can be? But bottom line is what is the cost level, so that we can make informed decisions as to what can be going forward or not. Where do we hit the where do we hit the dead end that we want, but we can't see that to be affordable? But we don't know that until they give that to us. So I see the 3 areas. And what Bob is saying, and again, having been in that business, you weigh the cost benefit of putting the time effort into a proposal. To what extent that's going to limit your pool of respondees or not. So I think the tighter that we can make it, and more definitive of deliverables, the better it's going to be for those who are going to respond to decide if they can do it, want to invest the time. And I don't know. I mean, I'll have to ask this question. In many cases I've been affiliated with, there are companies will have one arm that's an architectural design, the other arm is a construction side. And that might be part of what their proposal would be able to say, is that because we would be able to if we're then successful with the bid, we can move very effectively ahead because we've already done the groundwork. Is that something that you've experienced here or possible?
Yeah, I think as far as initially when the firms first look at it, and there is a feasibility study that shows them that it's possible, it could spur more interest and more confidence for them, not to copy it, to come up with their own solution, but know that what we're asking them to do will work.
So I think if you've got the information you need, I would just ask you to prepare a draft
Yes, sir.
RFP for a feasibility study as quickly as possible so we could get comments on it and make sure we're all comfortable with it and vote it out quickly.
Can I get one clarification? We have not talked about what we've done before, central office. As part of remember that's been part of the 12,000 square feet in all discussions these past months. Any guidance that you want to give, whether that should be in or out as a consideration?
I would leave it out. I think we'll get more buy-in from the community, and I think we can find some other places to put central office.
If we did a new building, I would love to stick a half floor on top and stop having to pay rent. So I would like to keep it in, because even if for a new build, it costs $3 million, we pay that back in less than 10 years, and then we live rent free for the next 40.
Yeah. Go ahead.
My view is that there's so much going on up there that you can stick central office any old place. And so my view is, for purposes of economy and maximizing the space's highest and best use, I would keep it out.
Same here, just base school, and just leave that out.
I'm inclined to take it out as well, to SOW not have central office as part of what you're working with.
I'm also fine to take it out. I just would rather I'd like to lose anything that's non-essential, and then you could add, it could be a part of City Hall, it could be, the A-wing, if that comes back as the best thing for repurposing. But I would, given that we're talking about removing things to save money that hurt a lot, like, more gym space, et cetera, I think we can. I agree with John very much that it's cost effective to not pay rent, but I don't think this is our only option to not pay rent. So.
And I would just hold out that looking at your enrollments, if we built the school for 1,200, by the time it opens, not all those classrooms are going to be needed at that time. You could then reevaluate, after you've looked at all other options, the classrooms that you will need for 3 years out yet are still vacant. Can you make use of that as one other option without looking at it as separate construction or as more additional space? It may be fluid. It may necessitate looking at it again. But I think if we strip this down to it's the school, we might be able to get a tighter RFP, and also keeping in mind the affordability piece at this time and what other options lie out there that we could discuss.
And then I think to close out this discussion with going forward and asking for the preparation of a draft RFP for the feasibility study, I don't think we need to do the resolution discussion, because that is encapsulated in what we're doing. And we're describing in more detail what we're doing. Okay. Anyone feel differently about that? Okay.
So I shall bring this on Thursday to the work group of this discussion, which we've discussed already, to reaffirm to the work group. And we will endeavor, Bob, and whatever you need me and my staff to do, we're going to charge ahead to bring something to you right quick.
Just one last follow-up. But what is the fate of MEH in this package here? Is it just not going to get studied, or is that?
Tell me what you want.
I think they're coming up to capacity, and so we're going to have to address that in some form or fashion. Maybe we just say, leave space notionally down the road, but I don't think we can just put blinders on and say that that's not an issue.
Right. You have a 684 projected, or what your high school will look like, or your middle school need, and you roll out, if you keep with these, you have 588 now, you're going to start hitting that point of need somewhere around 23, 24.
So we're going to need a bigger boat.
Or another place to.
I agree with what Mr. Castillo said. I think we, at the very least, need to plan for space for expansion. And it feels to me like, this is one that we might be able to kick down the road, but we've, at least in the recent history, we've never gone wrong by building too large. We've always gone wrong by building too small. And so I would, under any set of circumstances, I would like a feasibility study, I think, to consider MEH expansion. And if it can be part of and it would, basically it costs you $15 million to do it now, or it costs you $25 million to do it in 5 years. We'll leave the space for it either way. But it feels to me like you're going to get the connectivity and more capability if you include that now. That would be one of the last things I think I'd try to remove.
Very good.
And I think it opens up innovative possibilities too, like, especially with students going into each other's classrooms. You can design for that better if you do the expansion at the same time.
I think I hear from the board that it wants to have two separate buildings with each having its own identity. But the flexibility for ease of access, and down the road, more students are going to take higher level courses, as you know, that they can be distinct schools, but you have to allow the opportunity for more of the shared use and ease of accessibility.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the discussion of 5.07, discussion of the Economic Development Working Group. Mr. Webb, did you want to introduce this topic?
I can learn.
Yes. The City Council has voted on a resolution to create a working group. I believe that working group is the members of the Plan Commission, the Economic Development Committee, School Board, 2 members, and 2 members of the City Council to do this. And right now, we'll be working on what type of economic development to use on the site, be it 2 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres, that would be a part of the campus project, and kind of what's done on that. And what I wanted to do was open it up to 2 members who would like to serve on that. I know Mr. Lawrence and I had a conversation about the other aspects of the project. We've done identical resolutions, and he felt that we should continue to do the same thing, which I'm open to, but I just want to open the floor to get feedback and conversation, and to see if there were two members interested in serving on this.
So let's segment the discussion a little bit. So the City Council has already passed the resolution. That's correct?
That is correct.
So the first question is the procedural one that Mr. Lawrence raises about whether we should pass the same resolution or not. Mr. Lawrence, did you want to intervene on that?
No, I mean, I'm kind of agnostic on it. It's just every time we've ever had anybody put together on GM for the last 4 or 5 years, both bodies pass something setting up the same body. So my only point is, if we decide not to do it in tandem with the council, that's fine. Let's just do it knowing that we're doing it, not suddenly find out, hold it, we always did it one way and now we're doing it a different way. Why didn't anybody tell us? I'm not sure if it matters that much. I'm just pointing out that it would be different. And the bottom line is, you know, it is our land, 90% of it. So if I had to lean one way or another, I would rather have us take an affirmative vote to take part in something that would be looking at the economic development of our land, simply because it seems prudent for a property owner.
Would it satisfy, because I hear what you're saying, I'm just asking a question. Would it satisfy you if we took an affirmative vote on the representatives we would send to that committee?
Well, I think we have to do that anyway, and it may be that if we officially say we're going to send somebody to a body that was set up under this resolution, you know, you're implicitly agreeing to the resolution. I mean, that's not a big deal.
I don't feel overly strong about it either way. It feels to me like saying that, you know, we are dividing and the city's taking the lead on the economic development while we're not giving up the right to control what happens to school land. And we're taking the lead on the school program is in some sense an effort to decouple things that will let you move more efficiently in both those domains. So I don't feel real strongly about affirmative vote approving the same economic development working group, the same way that I wouldn't ask the city to approve an RFP that we're doing for design services on the school program. We need their buy-in because we want them to help contribute for it, but I just don't think we need to just always stay quite so tightly bound, but I'm happy to go either way. Anyone feel strongly about that either way?
About approving the board? Sorry, the group.
Matching the resolution from the city council.
No real objection.
Pardon?
I don't have any objection.
Either way, or?
Either way.
I would say this is distinguishable from what you were saying, because it is, you know, we are selling some of the family silver service to buy this new
yes.
This Taj Mahal, and so you know, we're the only thing that gives me pause here is that I think the work of this group is a bit down the road, and unless and until we know how much space there is and where it is. But you know, with those caveats, I'm not, and also I assume we're reserving all of our rights, and this body does not have the power to bind any of the bodies.
Yeah, I don't think we would delegate anything by that. Is that correct, Dr. Schiller?
I don't think so.
So yeah, then that's fine.
Well, but as for it being down the road, doesn't this sunset in June?
Yes.
Okay, that's not very far down the road.
May I ask what sunsets in June?
This economic development group.
Unless extended.
Okay, and I'm just curious. There's no decision on selling the land, is there? Because the lease option is always available.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's within scope too.
Yeah, I would say that sunsetting is problematic because, you know, one of the key issues is how much land is going to be available, and there are huge cost trade-offs there, and the answer to that is not going to be known by June 60th, 30th, or whatever. So, but that's easily fixed.
So I think that then takes us to the question of who's interested in serving on the group. I will tell you that I told Mr. Webb that I'd be happy to if it was called for, but I don't know. Mr. Webb, did you get volunteers?
I got others who kind of gave the same answer that you did, so I'm just kind of seeing who really stuff. I have a band because we have, over the next couple of weeks, we have a pretty busy full plate ourselves, so I understand the reluctance to serve, but I think being that at some point we'll play a role in this, and it is our land, and ultimately it's going to get developed. I think probably good for us to figure out who folks to, as the conversation starts to have folks there and represented on the committee.
So would you like people to volunteer in the session, or did you want to make a suggestion? I'm not quite sure.
My suggestion, Mr. Castillo has given, as he said, we spoke earlier, that he would be willing to, and if that is still the case.
I fall squarely into the Mr. Reidinger camp on that. I would love to yield to my more willing colleagues.
That's the part that from all the folks who have responded, I'll do it, but.
All right, so I'd love to do this. Nothing would make me happier than this.
Good for you.
Who wants to join me? Right? Come on.
I'll join you.
Miserable.
Will you do?
Nothing else going on. You two are busy.
Would folks be okay with Mr. Ankuma and I doing it? Is there anybody else who feels a passionate desire to be?
I would be very happy with you and Mr. Ankuma doing this.
But I'm happy to stand aside for Mr. Castillo.
Take charge and move out. With my blessing.
Then we've always done motions for these. Perhaps we could have a motion that at the same time suggest, our support for the work of the working group and as well as nominating the people, but I'm open to accepting a motion from any of the board members on this.
Yeah, I move, just, which one are we doing? Just to add, nominate
totally
the
up
two
to
of
you.
you to the, I move to appoint Mr. Reidinger, Mr. Ankuma to the Economic Working Group.
Second.
Right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, so that was efficiently done. Thank you. That takes us to our second closed meeting. For folks in the audience, this one may be a bit longer. I don't really have a sense for how long it will take. I would hear a motion to go into closed session.
Well, first, I think one thing for the audience, is there anything after this that would be worth staying for? Maybe just letting them know if there's...
Well, we may, based on the both open and closed discussions, take action on modification of the CIP.
Right.
But I think
No. I know. I'm just saying if
I believe the rest of the meeting is Mount Daniel.
Right.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Chair, pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A29, discussion of the award of a public contract involving expenditure of public funds, including interviews with bidders or offerers, and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract, where such discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, in particular, construction bids for Mount Daniel.
Second.
Second.
Mr. Ankuma.
Aye.
Mr. Castillo.
Aye.
Ms. Gill.
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Reidinger.
Yes.
Ms. Ward.
Yes.
Mr. Webb. Okay, well, yes, I guess.
Would someone like to move us back into open session?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Someone like to certify the meeting?
Okay, Mr. Chair, whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711 subsection B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies. And 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered. Second.
Okay, John Lawrence. Mr. Ankuma.
Aye.
Mr. Castillo. Ms. Gill.
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Reitinger.
Yes.
Ms. Ward. And Mr. Webb will abstain. Yes.
And I will vote second.
Okay, great.
Good night, Margaret.
All right, we are, thank you. We are now up to item 8.01, Mount Daniel, review of bids. Dr. Schiller, can you set up the issue for us?
Yes, sir. As I had indicated earlier, we received the bids on a timely schedule. They have been studied, evaluated. We've received multiple bids for the subcontractors, and due to delays and despite downsizing the project due to Fairfax County intervention, we are faced with bids that have come up because of the cost of subcontractors doing business, the cost of materials, that we're seeing an increase of 21% over what was projected, which means that in round figures, $2,139,000 and change over what was anticipated to come in. GMP is now, so to speak, busted, that we cannot, because this is just a matter of the escalation and other convening forces. This places us in a position where we'd like to offer a solution that would be a combination of looking at whether or not any of these bids, and there are multiple bids for each of the subcontractors, and if it was just one or two bids per work, like for steel, for example, or whatever, we could say, well, there are outliers or anomalies. But in the analysis that was completed, the range of the bids and the justifications and everything else, that's what we're facing, folks. We can attempt to go back to renegotiate some of it, but the outcome may or may not hold. I've asked Hunter to go and look at the amount of possible monies we might sweep out of other projects, and we can appropriate some of that money perhaps to offset. But I do need from you all to consider authorizing us to request an increase to our fiscal year CIP. We went in light this year, but somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1.5, 1.6, I think at a minimum, we need to request from the city so they can start factoring that in. We have a finance committee meeting on Friday with the city. We've been pressed by the city officials for knowing what the bids have come in for. I've given them a quick heads up, so I didn't want them to read about it in the paper or hear through on the street from this meeting. And so I would suggest that we may be able to offset and use some money. And Hunter, what have you estimated out for this?
Right now, looking at our current CIP projects, there are two projects which are specifically earmarked for modernization and keeping our older facilities going. And there's about $700,000 in those two. We would not recommend touching any of that. That would be if the boilers at GM go. We're looking at doing some network redundancy and disaster recovery with those, some sidewalks, things like that. However, the Thomas Jefferson HVAC project is completed now. It's fully completed. It came in well under bid, and there is currently a balance of almost $620,000. 619,918 unspent, and those are funds that have already been bonded by the city, and those would be available to be moved to support the Mount Daniel project.
So, without prejudice to future board action, given that matters are still a bit fluid, what you need from the board is an approval to request a change to the CIP in a protective capacity to the current amount of bids minus the remaining funds left on the TJ HVAC contract. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Questions, discussion?
Second.
We need a motion.
Well,
Go ahead, sir.
One question, and that would be, do we want to assume the offset, or would it be more prudent to increase the CIP by the 2.139 or whatever, out of an abundance of caution?
Well, and you could go either way. I will say that, just that staff discussions that Dr. Schiller and I have had with Cindy Mester and Melissa Ryman over with the general government when we were going over the CIP budget initially, is we identified where we were with certain current CIP projects, and it was Melissa and my thinking that the TJ HVAC money could be a buffer if the rebids at Mount Daniel came over. So it's sort of in the thinking right now, but the board can do.
I guess, is there anything else that might speak for those funds? Is the roof at George Mason contract, is that looking like it's proceeding apace?
Well, at this point, we were looking at, given the fact that it's looking more like an operating expense, that we were planning on going ahead and maybe using some of the remaining contingency this year to address that, and then there would be an annual contract renewal.
But that looks like that is going to be, we're going to lock that in.
Yes, we're working on that.
Yes. Stupid question I didn't ask you before. We talked about where would the money come from the feasibility. Is any of this money available?
No.
It's not capital.
Nice thought, though.
Well, I was thinking that it would
Think
be
outside
capital.
that box. That's right.
Yeah.
It is, lowercase.
Lowercase, yeah. Any of that money you're going to use for the roof, could we appropriate some of this money for the roof and use that money that we're talking about for the feasibility study?
It's entirely possible.
I'll look at every option available, guys.
Give me a number and I'll.
I mean, can you reserve 100,000? Shift this money from I'm winging it here, but can we reserve perhaps 100,000 if we go forward with a feasibility or an RFP? So we don't have to go to the city, ask for more, and increase our ask by another 100,000 for the CIP.
I think one of the issues may be, when would the feasibility study be finished? Would it be finished prior to June 30th?
Yes.
Okay, then.
That's what our schedule.
Okay, very good. Then we can work towards that.
Yeah, well, let's also raise
suggestions.
Well, no, let's raise this at a Thursday meeting, because I thought the working group had money, and the 100,000, was never talked about coming out of our hide in any of the meetings we've had. So I'd like to find a way for it not to come out of our hide.
And there is a joint GM school general government project that actually it's on, but it is on the general government side.
Right, but that's what we funded RTKL and other things.
Correct.
So
And is there any
finding different ways to spend our money is great. I'd like to find different ways to spend other people's.
I'm not sure about the balance in that account.
I was going to ask you about that.
I knew you were, sir.
Yeah. And to Mr. Castillo's point, I struggle to see, following on that point, I struggle to see how the city ponies up $2 million, knowing we have $500,000 at least available. So we're definitely going to have to net that out.
My thinking is 1.5 to 1.6 ask.
Yeah.
That's where I arrived.
At least, if nothing at all, I think it shows some willingness or commitment or effort on our part to meet them. Definitely not halfway, because we just don't have it, but at least part of the way.
So expand the CIP by 1.6 million?
By the difference. You shake.
Well, actually, yeah. I would think it would be expand that project by the amount needed, and identify a funding source as a transfer from the TJ HVAC project over to the
I didn't follow that.
It's, well, I think, well, the Mount Daniel project we know is going to be over in the it sounds like in the neighborhood of $2 million. And therefore, the increase to that project's budget is going to have to reflect the full increase.
Right, where you pay for it.
And how you pay for it, though, is, we already have some existing revenue, or do we issue new bonds, or do we dip into capital reserves?
101.
So the CIP should still be for the full increase?
Yes.
Okay, then that makes it easier, right?
And we would need to pass that formally next week?
I think we need to pass it tonight.
Oh, less, and our funding sources are less than 100 that we're proposing, right?
I took Hunter to just say that
Yes.
we had to increase the CIP for Mount Daniel by the full amount, regardless of offset.
Right.
And then we may not get the money because we can do offsets, but the CIP for Mount Daniel needs to reflect the full cost,
You heard correctly, thank you.
That's a proper way to do it.
which makes a more simple motion.
That's even a
If
better
someone would like to make it.
Actually, Hunter, what would be the dollar figure in a motion? Increasing it by
2.139?
Why don't we say for round figures 2.1?
Yeah.
To the extent Bob can get us. Yeah.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, I would move that the school board vote to request to increase the CIP for the Mount Daniel project in the amount of $2.1 million, subject to offsets, if and as feasible.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. I think that's just background noise. All right, thank you all. So with that, I think we have reached adjournment.